Hi, I'm Joanna Kenworthy, and tonight I'm going to talk to you about IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Progress towards IDEA began in 1975 with the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. It was considered at the time to be a landmark law, and it gave disabled children the right to receive a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Prior to 1975, people considered disabled or mentally retarded were shunned by society, hidden by their families, and in the worst cases, institutionalized. The federal government began to support a movement toward accommodations for children with disabilities as early as the 1950s. With the help of advocates from the ARC, which is the world's largest community-based organization of and for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, the government began developing processes for children with disabilities and their families. Once the federal government became involved in the change, people with disabilities began to gain equal access to education in public schools. There are 4 purposes of the Act as outlined by the Department of Education. The first one is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education, which emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs. Also to assure that the rights of children with disabilities and their parents are protected, and also to assist states and localities to provide for the education of all children with disabilities, and finally to assess and assure the effectiveness of efforts to educate all children with disabilities. In 1990, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was renamed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. All events, including court cases, amendments, and changes to IDEA, served as turning points for the education of students with disabilities. The most significant outcome of IDEA, however, is the federal mandate of the Individualized Education Program, or the IEP. According to the U.S. Department of Education, the IEP is the cornerstone of a quality education for each child with a disability. In 1997, IDEA was amended to require that all IEPs include a statement of how students' disabilities affect their involvement and progress in the general curriculum, as well as how measurable goals that would enable children to be involved with and to make progress in that curriculum. In other words, inclusion. By implementing an IEP, a student with a disability is given the education that is right for them and does not exclude them from a regular public school classroom experience. My concentration areas are English and teacher students with disabilities, so I will likely find myself having to adapt lessons according to the specific needs of students, whether they're in a collaborative setting with other students who don't have special needs, or if they're in a replacement setting, if it's a smaller group of children being pulled out to have more of an individualized lesson. First thing I'd like to do is modify the teaching of the main ideas of what we're reading in our English and Language Arts class. Students with a learning disability or a cognitive disability might not be able to interpret text the same way that those who don't have those disabilities can. And rather than having students in a replacement setting write a paper focusing and pulling apart central ideas and themes about stories or plays that we've read, I like to assign them more straightforward questions based on the text. Some examples include character relationships, identifying the setting, and incorporating details from the text that they can remember. I'd also like to have students recall information through more artistic measures. In English class, expression is mostly done through writing. Many times students with a weakness in one area may have a strength in another. So for example, a deaf child may not be able to hear the inflection in a reader's voice if we're reading a play by Shakespeare, but they may be able to draw a fantastic representation of the scene. I think that this could be done in both a collaborative and a replacement environment, and I think it pushes all the students to think outside of the box, and it gives them more options than your standard term paper. I'd also like to create an accessible and safe classroom for all students. My thinking behind this was teaching students with ADD or ADHD. They wouldn't do well sitting in a group or in a table. I'd rather have the rows of desks or have it in a horseshoe shape to keep their attention focused more on the lesson versus what's going on around them. And finally, for students with dyslexia, perhaps use multi-sensory instruction. So sight, sound, taste, touch, movement. I think it would help all students, not just those with dyslexia. If we integrated maybe sight and sound, making instructions and objectives as clear as possible is imperative for all students, not just those with disabilities. Maybe we could allow students to tape record instructions or lessons, and certainly highlighting and color coding always helps. So to sum it up, our fight for inclusion and proper education for students with disabilities is not over. There have been several changes and amendments to IDEA since it was first passed in 1975. Most recently, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 included $12.2 billion in funding specifically for IDEA. Children with special needs are no longer treated as second-class citizens, and I think our job as teachers is to continue to work on improving the quality of the education that these exceptional students receive. Thank you.